you very much. Good afternoon, everybody who made it after lunch. I'll be talking about the European research funding and one particular part of it, European Research Council, that is now close to 10 years old organization that was created after years of lobbying from the scientists. It's one of a kind on the European scale, or part of the European institutions that funds research on purely bottom-up basis. So we have very little requirements as such, except very high quality. It was seen for a long time in the research community that the EU has a very complicated, industry-oriented research program that doesn't exactly suit academic research and doesn't necessarily put forward new ideas. It tries to sort of develop existing ideas in a way it was a bit conservative, and that's why at some moment scientists came together and told the Commission we would like to have something like this. And 10 years ago, the Commission decided to create, together with the Member States, European Research Council, and now we are starting to see how that system works. I would like to have one comment on the way we fund research, which actually makes a big difference. There are lots of studies on this. I put one concerning Howard Hughes Medical Institute and in the States. That sort of is probably a small fund, but they try to look research that rewards long-term success, tolerates failure, allows the research to set their own agenda, and compare the results to the National Institute of Health. That is pretty much predetermined. We will want to have research on this, we want to achieve that. And the outcome was that the Howard Hughes Medical Institute researchers produce high-impact papers at much higher rate than the control group, and the direction of their research changes in ways that suggest that the program uses them to explore novel lines of inquiry. So instead of politicians telling you what to do, the funding agency allows the researchers to decide what to do, and that seems to lead much more new ideas. ERC was actually originally created in a program called Ideas. It's very simple, it's a program on ideas. Whatever new ideas come up, we allow you to research on them, assuming just high quality. So what the politicians did was that they agreed, okay, we have a huge part of European research funding that's called Horizon 2020, and 70% of it is given to the European Research Council. And that is what I'm talking about. There's a lot to talk about the rest. I'm not an expert on that. If you have any questions about that, I can try to find an answer. I can help you explore them. But the part that I really know is ERC, and to some extent Marie Curie program, which I used to work for earlier, but I have been out of there for 6 years now, so I'm not exactly a current state expert on Marie Curie. So what is the European Research Council? It's a structure that is slightly complicated, but it's governed by a scientific council. And the scientific council is made of scientists. It's not politicians, it's not bureaucrats in the Brussels, it's really active scientists who decide how to use that money in the best way possible. And they decide how to do it. And where I work, it's the European Research Council executive agency. So we carry out and we do it in practice based on how our scientific council decides. And we support, and that's the decision of the council. They want to support individual scientists, not groups or consortia or networks. They want to give the money to an individual who decides how best to use it. It's based in global peer review. So we have experts from all around the world, but still mostly in Europe, but really we have people from everywhere to select the projects. We have 0 predetermined subjects, so there's absolutely nothing that we tell you should do research on this or that. There's 0 of that, and we cover all areas of research up to humanities and social sciences included. I think out of the roughly 15,000 plus proposals that we have received so far, we have concluded that maybe 5 of them, we were not sure if they are research, and if they are research on what topic they are, and we didn't evaluate them. So everything else has gone through. So sometimes there's really no selection on the basis of topic, as long as we can determine that it's research. I haven't seen those, I can't tell what they are. But
sorry, I missed the last number. You said 50 out of 50,000? 5,000?
5 proposals out of 50,000 have been excluded based on the grounds that they are not suitable for the program. So we really don't select anything out. I try to explain a bit how we operate. This is important, although it doesn't exactly concern people who apply for our research funding. But we have 2 lines of sort of rather separate. On the left is the scientific line. So we have the scientific council, we have the ERC president who decide how to use the money, what is the funding strategy. They appoint all the panel members who evaluate the proposals, but they don't participate in any of this process. So they decide the rules, but at that moment they distance themselves, they look how it works, but they don't participate. And the panel members who evaluate all the proposals that we receive for research are fully independent. I as an agency person, I work with them very closely, but I have 0 say on what they should be funding. And the panel members also appoint the external reviewers of for all the proposals. So this selection process is entirely in the hands of scientists. Every time I hear about the Brussels bureaucrats didn't do this and that, as long as it concerns selection of the project, we are not involved. We help as much as we can, but everything is the hand of the scientific community and the individual reviewers. On the right-hand side is the bureaucracy. That's how we handle all the process. So I work for an executive agency. As a commission established agency, so we are linked to the EU circles like everybody else. We are governed by the same rules of legal, financial aspects like everybody else. But this interferes minimally with the work to be done. And what we do as scientific officers, I'm a physicist myself, mostly on the quantum optics area, a bit on quantum electronics, so not exactly solid-state condensed matter physics, although I'm now currently coordinator of the condensed matter physics panel. So we work very closely with the scientists, the panel members who select the projects, and we deal with all the practicalities, including the follow-up of the projects. But we don't interfere with the content of them either. So if anybody has been involved in other EU-funded research projects, the project officers often come to the meetings, they want to know this and this and this, if you want to change it with the project, and the project officer has a view on whether that makes sense or not. We do very little of that either. So if the project, we give a grant for 5 years, We fully understand that something you planned didn't work out, you have to do something else. It's all fine by us as long as it stays with the scope of the original proposal. So we are not micromanaging. You said that you will deliver this and this measurement by the end of that and that month, and because you didn't, we stop your grant. We don't do that. We understand that there's always a risk. Not every project works out the way it was planned, and it's perfectly fine. It's my job to tell our financial people that that is fine. So, given the size of the European Research Council, we handle grants worth 2 billion euros every year, roughly. Our system is surprisingly simple. We basically have exactly one kind of grants. You see 3 here and a fourth on the bottom, but it's basically only one kind of grants. What we do is we have a principal investigator who makes a proposal for 5 years, and we select the ones to be funded, and we fund it. Now, the numbers are rather high, close to 10,000 a year, so we have to slice them up so that it's manageable. So what we do is that we have 3 slices based on age. So we have starting grants for those 2 to 7 years after the PhD, consolidated grants 7 to 12, and advanced grants for everybody. Actually, I think our youngest applicant didn't have a PhD, so had to apply for an advanced grant because it was not eligible for the others. But that may have changed. Maybe we have a younger one now. We have a few little derogations on these 8 categories. Mostly if you have a career break, you get an extension. So for every children, there's a certain extra amount of time. So instead of 7 years after the PhD, you can get a year, 2, 3 more, and still be considered in the starting grant category. So they are just sort of practical realization that not everybody is doing research all the time, especially if you are taking care of kids or sick relatives or family members, that sort of things. So we have a little clause for that, so we can extend the window. We used to have another category that is called synergy grants. It's the only ERC grant that actually deals with collaborations. Currently, it's not on the menu. It might be coming back. So it was last time we had them. It was up to 6 years, 15 million euros for up to 4 people. But that was a rather radical try from the council to see how it works. We've been looking how it actually works, and it seems to be going well, so it might be coming back as soon as our budget allows to introduce the synergy grants again. The proof of concept grant is a small extra grant. So if you come up with something that has commercial potential, we don't fund commercial research as such. It's not our purpose. But if anything comes along that lines, we have a little extra grant that allows you to pursue it further. But it's not a requirement for an ERC grant as such, so we don't evaluate any commercial impacts. We look at just the scientific quality of the work. All in all, what this means that we actually give priority to young people. It just depends on how much money we put on those 3 slots. So most of our grantees are actually starting in consolidated grantees up to 45-ish. And after that, most of the grants are, of course, advanced grants. But given the size of the money, most people who actually work with the ERC money are postdocs, PhD students, and those numbers are a bit old. I think they can roughly doubled by this time. So actually we are funding quite a lot of people working in research groups, although the number of grants is of course smaller. Those of you who are planning to write a proposal, it's also a relatively simple process, but it takes lots of time. And there's a word of warning here. It's something that you should get 6 months to do. Not full-time work, but you can't put on a proposal in short period of time unless you somehow exactly know what you're doing. Yep.
Which countries are eligible?
I forgot to mention that it's on the slide. So it's all the EU member states and all the countries that are associated with the program, including Ukraine starting from last year. So we have the associated countries that are not EU member states. The biggest one by far in terms of participation are Switzerland and Israel. And we have Norway, Iceland, Liechtenstein opted out. I don't think we ever had a single proposal from them, but they were part of the system.
Is Switzerland allowed?
Switzerland they are sort of in the process of sort of getting out. That's not. We don't know what's going to happen. It's in the hands of the politicians. They are negotiating whether Switzerland is actually part of the program starting from next year or not. That we don't know.
What about Britain?
Britain is legally nothing has happened. Britain is part of the EU. They had a non-binding referendum. As long as they are member states, they are perfectly eligible for funding. After that, it depends on the negotiations. Nobody can tell. But in addition to those countries, most of the Balkan countries are included, Ukraine is included, and the number of the associated countries change a bit occasionally, so I don't have a full list actually now.
So Serbia allowed?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's most of the Balkan countries are. I'm not sure if there are some that are not.
What about the east from Serbia?
I think they are all included.
Yeah. What about here?
Yes. And Turkey is so it's a large area of collaborating countries who all pay a participation fee to be included in the program and are fully eligible to participate. There are already about 10 Ukrainian principal investigators working on ERC grants, but they are not in Ukraine. They are in France, UK, Spain, Germany. So anybody, for the researchers, everybody's allowed. No matter where you come from, as long as you work in Europe. So that's the requirement.
So what about if somebody has affiliated position in Europe?
The requirement is that you have to spend 50% of your time in Europe and between 30 to 50% of your time on the project, depending on which grant category you are in.
So this means what? You have to physically be present in your second position?
You have to be physically present 50% of your time in Europe. We don't attach GPSs to anybody to track that, but that has become slightly problematic in some cases where people get positions in the States.
So when you say these grants of 2-3 million euros, is that the same for both theories and experimental?
Yes. There is a minor difference there, and you can, part of the, so the starting grant, for instance, is up to 1.5 million, but you can have another $500,000 for large equipment or participation to large facilities, or as a startup cost if you come from outside Europe. So there's a little extra money that is only for equipment related costs. But you have to check the exact details. I'm not writing the rules here, so I will rather try to give the general understanding. So the evaluation process is, you have 2 steps. So when you submit a proposal, you have to write step 1 and step 2 proposal at the same time. That's on purpose, because we don't want anybody to send their proposal in the first phase and thinking that I'll do the paperwork of the rest later. Because the experience is that half the proposals probably, we experience from other funding agencies that you can't count on the quality of the whole process so easily. So we need everything in one go. So what happens when you send the proposal in? We give the first part to our panel members to read, and they first read about the project. So what they are asked to look at is the groundbreaking nature. It's not incremental research. If you say that I've been doing this and this and this and this for 10 years and I'm close to breakthrough, I want to carry on with that, you really have to show that you now have a new idea that actually makes the breakthrough. So we don't fund ongoing research without new ideas. And you have to think big. It's really, really important. So we don't look at the impact of the project as such on the economic or EU scale or anything like that. We look at the impact of the project on the field. So whatever you suggest, you should be able to figure it in the cover page of Nature or Science or some other journal. It's something that people should be interested to see. I'm not saying that we particularly value Nature or Science. It's very nice if you publish there, but it's something that is of interest. And you need to know your competitors. You have to show that you know exactly what is the state of the art in the field, and you need to be able to show how you are different. In the first phase, we don't really need the details of the methodology. It's nice to have it, in a way, but there's not space for that. You have 5 pages to explain what's the difference you want to make. So you have to show that it's feasible somehow. You have to convince the panel that you have the expertise to do it, but you leave the details for later. Preliminary results, they're good to know, but if you have too many of them, then the question is whether you really come up with something new or you just want to finish. So it's a good question to decide when to apply. You apply too early, and you cannot show that you can make it. If you apply too late, you already have your ideas half done, and you will not get 5-year funding for it. I put this concise and clear presentation is crucial. It's part of it. Not everybody in the panel is, of course, from your field, so it needs to be understandable for everybody. But it's also how to say, it's a hint to say that you should probably show your proposal to somebody else, somebody who you know, who can give you hints to polish it. Because we do see proposals that are sort of half-baked, nobody gave it a second look, and it's not counted against the proposal as such, but the problem is that you might not answer all the questions you think you did, but if somebody else reads the proposal, you are not actually saying what you want to say. And that's why it's very good to make sure that somebody else has read it and gives you feedback, and take the feedback seriously. The second part is you. we basically have look at two things. We look at the proposal and we look at the applicant. So you have to make the case why it should be you. What do you have that maybe nobody else has to really do this work? And we ask you to show your key publication. We don't want to have your whole list of publications. Partly because we don't want to encourage people to just publish numbers. Show your main contributions. Argue how they are related to this work. And give a realistic picture of who you want to work with, how you do it. Don't list everybody you talk to in conferences over the past 10 years. But show that you are actually connected to the community. The second part, so what happens at this stage? Maybe roughly 1/3 will go to the second round. The rule is that we can invite the second round 3 times the budget that the panel has available. It usually translates to something like 1/3 of the proposals, but that's not the actual rule. So there's a rather heavy selection at this stage. And then the panel will be shown the second part of your proposal, and only at that stage. So make sure that it goes together with your proposal. It doesn't repeat it. There's nothing more disappointing for the panel to see that there's nothing new in the step 2. In the step 1, you create the appetite. In the step 2, you have to deliver. If it looks like you never thought far enough, it's basically a no-go. You have to argue, again, the difference you're going to make. You have to argue for the methodology, how you're going to do it. And this is also very important. It's not a suggestion for work. The panel needs to know that if they give you the money, you know exactly what you start doing. It's not that if I get the money, I'll start making plans for this and this and this. You have to have the plans, and you have to show it. So, on purpose, I'm not trying to make this sound easy. It's not to discourage, but it's to make sure that you know what ERC projects are about. And you also have to be realistic. Not everything works the way you want. So you have to discuss where it might break down, what do you do if it happens, how do you fix the project if something goes differently from what you thought. A few practical comments. It's amazing how many times these somehow fail, but that's why we keep repeating them. Register early. We open the call something like 3 months before the submission deadline, but you should start thinking about 6 months earlier in order to think all the steps through. But as soon as you can, register in the system. It's very frustrating if you try to do that on the last day, the system failed, or you realize that I forgot to pass a document somewhere, I don't have something it takes. So do it in time. And you can change the proposal until the end of the deadline. Don't leave this to the last minute. Follow the page limits. It's also very annoying for the panel if somebody goes 5 pages beyond what they are supposed to use. Just go by the book there, and you will be safe from any unnecessary hassle. And once you've submitted everything, download everything to see that it does what it's supposed to do. We have sometimes people believe that they submitted their proposal, but they uploaded the wrong PDF file. you just don't want to do it. So just make sure that everything is in line, and discuss it with people you trust. Of course, you shouldn't put it online and ask people to comment, but you should know who to talk to. And I have to say that most Western European universities have very good support services to make sure that you are informed. They push you to find somebody to help you write the proposal or proofread the proposal. They train you for interviews. They do all that sort of things, and it takes a long time to get there. Am I running out of time?
Yeah, I suppose.
Okay. A few more. I don't have too many slides, so I'll get there. Some typical reasons for rejection. This happens. Our success rate is something like 10%. So you should know what are the potential caveats. Insufficient track record, you are applying too early, or insufficient leadership profile. So a couple of hints there. If you never publish without your PhD supervisor, it's not a good sign. And when I was a postdoc, my postdoc supervisor at the time had a logic with his PhD students that each of them should have one paper without him even before the PhD, just to make sure that everybody gets used to writing on their own without their supervisors. And it's actually a very good way to try how far you can go on your own without your supervisor. And it also helps here. The project, don't be too narrow. Limited interest, it could work. It might make the huge difference, but then you have to understand what you're doing. And don't try to cover everything and argue all the benefits between the earth and the sky. But that's your judgment. No incremental research. You have to plan your project well. Your university should be able to help on that as well. They should be able to make your budget plans and everything. They know how it works. And insufficient risk management. You don't know what happens if something crucial fails. A few more words about how we evaluate things. I'll go this rather quickly as I'm short of time. We have 25 panels, so there shouldn't be any gaps within panels. We try to make sure that even if you are interdisciplinary proposals, we cover it as much as we can. But we have 25 panels in 3 different domains: physical sciences and engineering, life sciences, and social sciences and humanities. They're nominated all before the submission deadline, so we don't adjust the panels based on what the proposals are. But we regularly update the panels to make sure that the expertise is sufficient to cover everything they have to read. And the scientific council is really in charge of all this process. Okay, these are the panels. Our own comment here is that probably the most relevant is the PE3 panel here. It's condensed matter physics. It has a bit broader meaning that this conference, we also include soft matter, biological matter, physics of biological systems as part of the condensed matter physics. But it's really a continuum starting from hardcore solid state physics, experimental techniques, all the way to soft and biomatter. And we cover it pretty consistently. Okay, this is just some advice. You can, if you think that your proposal is interdisciplinary, if it needs to be read by several panels, you have a way to argue it, you can indicate it. We'll make sure that we get extra reviews to cover, to make sure that the panel doesn't read a proposal that it doesn't fully understand. We'll find the right people to read it. And if you, for whatever reason, propose the wrong panel, we may transfer it to the right place, but that happens rather rarely. My last slide, the oncoming calls. The starting grants, next one is this October, well, it's the 18th of this month, so it's rather soon. But this is our basically annual cycle. We have a starting grant call in October, consolidated grant call in February, and advanced grant call in August, September. So that goes on a yearly basis. Okay? That's all. I'm happy to take questions now or any time during the conference. I will be here if you have any questions on ERC, on other EU funding that I might be able to help with, or if you're planning to submit a proposal, talk to me. I'll see what I can do. Thank you very much.
Yeah, questions?
I have two short but related questions. Probably not necessary.
Thank you very much. If there is an ongoing project, Horizon 2020 program funded by the European Commission, is the principal investigator eligible to apply for ERC project?
Yes, the only requirement is that you have to be able to do at least, well, it depends on the grant type, in 30 and 50% of your time for the ERC grant alone. So if you are fully occupied by other grants, then you have to make a case how you can actually take the time for the new project. But that's the only requirement.
Right, thank you. And the second question is, if this second project is in line with the first one, with the already funded, but contains real breakthrough, would it be advantage or disadvantage during the panel review of this ERC second project?
Well, there's an underlying EU rule that is very rarely used, which says that we cannot fund the same project twice. We cannot even evaluate it. So you have to bring in your project something new. That if somehow some of the panel members notice, but yes, but there is we just granted a project for this same person or the same consortia or somebody you are involved in, and it has all these elements already in there, then you put your project in severe risk. With one exception, that in a Marie Curie program there's this little carrier integration grant that is, I think it's 150,000 euros or something for just help you get started. And if you have that, and then you get an ERC grant, I think what our granting department is that they will reduce the ERC grant by the same amount that you already had in their previous grants, and you get the rest as your ERC grant.
Thank you very much.
More questions? We are now in the process. I and my colleague, who is a philosopher, and I am a physicist, condensed matter physics. We are in the process of writing a book in methodology of science. And can we obtain a sort of, is it eligible for us to obtain the support what we need? We need not a large amount of money, but we need to go to the libraries. We have some spots in Europe where to go. And to use it, we write it in Ukrainian. Of course, we know English, but this is to support the translation of the book. We want to publish it in English, of course, in Springer or other. Can such submission, is it eligible?
Believe it or not, we act, yeah, well, in principle it is. But the question is, I'm a bit unfamiliar with the more social sciences, humanities, history part of the project, of the program. But we I believe we have something similar in our grant books. The question is that can you bring something, a new perspective, something that has never been considered. But that is the evaluation criteria. So it needs to bring something that that opens a new way to look at things. But the humanities part of the grant portfolio is surprisingly diverse.
More questions?
As far as I have understood, the ERC gives the money to the principal investigator directly. This is what
the money goes to the university.
That was my question.
Okay, the deal is that the money goes to the university, so you need to have a university who supports you, but they sign an agreement saying that you are in full control of that money.
Okay, and another question is, still the principal investigator has to plan the finances of the project, yes, so what to pay for and so on. It's relatively clear with the equipment or expensibles, but what about the salaries? Does that mean that only the positions can be funded within the framework of the university and within the framework of the local governmental standards or pay amounts and so on? So in other words, if you hire a postdoc, so can that be a postdoc according to the European standards, because the salaries are quite different, or that should be simply a position typical for the Ukrainian university?
Okay.
In this case.
Thank you. The rule is that all the work contracts are local work contracts. We don't interfere with them. Whatever local rules are in place, and we cover the salaries in that line. Having said that, especially in the Eastern Europe, it's well known that it might be much more difficult to recruit a full-time postdoc because of the salaries that can be offered. And there are ways to do it, but it takes some extra effort. There are places who, for instance, create research centers that are institutions under private law that are owned by the university or are associated with the university. So then the ERC grant could be managed by one of those institutions that are not limited by the university rules. They are, in principle, private research institutions. But of course, creating something like this it's not going to happen by the time you send your proposal and it suddenly comes into being. But it's also done in many Western European universities. That they create an entire institution that governs all the EU grants and make their own rules for them, and that's perfectly fine. But of course, an individual researcher, it's very hard to do it. But otherwise, you go by the local salary scale and rules.
Yeah, more questions? Am I allowed?
Sure.
Yeah. So, in what you just answered to this question, who sets the rules for overhead, you or the university?
Overhead is very simple. We pay 25% overhead. There's nothing to be negotiating there. Although there's something to be negotiated. And it's also, I'm just telling examples what some universities do. The university is allowed to keep it, but they're also allowed to give it to the principal investigator. So I have lots of researchers who have, they might be starting grantees who just got their first permanent position. They may make a deal with the university that, okay, if I get an ERC grant, I keep 80% of the overheads for my group. And if the university accepts, that's perfectly fine. But it's really a question of negotiation. And but we don't care. If that money, from our point of view, goes to the university, whatever they want to do with it, it's their business.
So you said 25%.
25% is the whole framework program overhead. There might be 1 or 2 tiny exceptions.
Last call.
Hello.
Yeah.
No microphone. What are the chances of coming back and it could happen?
It's in the planning. There's no decision on it, but it's probably coming back in one way or the other. Whether it's on the same budget or whatever it is, but what we don't, well, what the scientific council doesn't want to do is to have the synergy grants back and with a 3% success rate and 10 grants per year. So they will bring it back if they decide to do so only when there's enough budget to make it a significant call. Because so far it's more, let's try these new ideas, you see how it works. The outcome is that it seems to work pretty well. But they will wait until there is enough money for it in a large scale.
Yeah. More questions? Yeah. So one thing I remember thinking about when you spoke, it was very interesting, by the way. Thank you. Thank you very much. I remember when I go to Europe, every time I go, I hear from colleagues lots of complaints about ERC. I won't tell you names, but I always thought that they are unreasonable people who are too negative and so forth. But then listening, I thought that the system would be 1 and be 2 parts, both required. It's very heavy on the people. For example, I mean, in my country, we write lots of grants. And typically, success rate is maybe 20% or 15%. So we have to write 6 grants or something to get 1 funded. And if I would have to write a white paper and then on top of that a 5 times longer proposal, I wouldn't be able to survive.
Actually,
usually you send in a white paper and you are very happy when it's rejected quickly and they don't ask you to submit full proposal.
we had a problem, especially in the very first ERC call, we had a problem that this double 2-step submission process led to a huge number of proposals. It's actually one way for us to limit the number of proposals.
Right.
It's a harsh reality. ERC was coming a few years ago into a situation that we struggled in the evaluation because of the large number of proposals, and we haven't changed the evaluation system, so we evaluate exactly the way as we did, but we sort of try to reduce the number of incoming proposals. One is, which is rather strict, is the resubmission restrictions. In the step 1, if you don't make it in the second round, you then get either B or C, and C means you have to skip 2 years of proposals. On the third year you can come back. If you get a B, you have to skip 1 year. And that's to make sure that we just don't get the same proposal back every single year and use our resources to do it.
No, I understand. Just on my side, it looks like there's an agency that asks for a pre-proposal and full proposal at the same time, and then they reject it. The amount of time you spend creates so much frustration that you never apply again to that place.
I have a second comment on that. When I talk to people who actually applied and didn't get an ERC grant, in reality, okay, it's a small number of cases, but they say that having gone through the process actually helps them to write better other proposals. Because and my recommendation is that if you start writing a proposal, you write the step 2 proposal first. Because then you know whether you are actually ready to submit the proposal. And if you are not ready yet with that, maybe you let it slip over a year and do it next year. If you are not happy with your step 2 proposal, there's no point writing the step function.